So yeah, just by way of introduction. So I'm Tyler. I work at Carleton University. I'm part of the board of CUSC. I'll be running the webinar for us today. Just by some housekeeping things. So Glenn will have everyone muted just because there's so many people here. It may be impossible to hear me otherwise with all the background noise. If you do have a question as you go along, there's a little chat feature. So if you put your mouse, for most people, I believe it should be at the bottom of the screen. You'll see a little panel there, and one of the options says chat. And if you have a question as you go along, you can just feel free to type it in the chat. It's probably the easiest way. I know there's at least one person calling in by phone, so that won't be possible. So maybe we'll unmute people at the end to make sure that we can answer everyone's questions. But if you have a question as you go along, that would be the way to do it, is just to pop it in the chat, and we'll answer it as we progress here today.
As soon as you send your chat, a little icon starts to flash orange, so we should see it pretty quickly when you send your message.
Yeah. So with that, why don't we begin? So I'm just going to share my screen here. So that you can all follow along with me here as we go, so that you can see exactly what's going on. So thanks everyone for joining today. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing a little bit of a walkthrough on how to register and talking through some of the different registration options that you can choose, what they mean, why you might want to choose them, what the benefits are to them, and also help you as you go through and understand the registration process, so that some things aren't necessarily always clear, especially if you're a first-time registrant. We'll try and help make sense of all that for you. And again, as we go, if you have questions, you can just type them in the chat there. Dan, if I don't see them, if you wouldn't mind just making a little note for me, just to make sure that we get everyone's questions answered here. So the first step, if you are to be registering, is you can either go to the email that we sent out a little while back inviting everyone to participate, or you could just go to the CUSC website. And so the address is just www.CUSC-CCREU.ca. And that will bring you here, which is our website. So that's where I am at the moment. The website defaults to English, but if you are a French speaker by default, you can choose the French language option here. You can see it on the right on the menu. And all the information is the same, just everything, including all the documents and supporting information, will be available to you in French, so that you can do your registration in your preferred language. I'm going to do everything in English because otherwise I'd have to apologize profusely to anyone who spoke French after I mangled it. So we're going to stick with English today, but it is there for you if you would like to do it in French. So from here, we're just going to jump right into the registration, and I'm going to walk us through and talk a little bit about the options as we go along. So if you were to register, you would click on the taking part here, which is that third item. And it brings you to this page here. And if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see there's this nice big red button that says click here to register for the 2020 survey of middle year students. So that's what we're going to be going through. I've opened up a couple of the documents that I think would be helpful as we go through. One of them I've opened just for reference is the price list, which just lets you know what it's really just a compacted view of all the options that are available in the registration and in the procedures menu as well, and just gives you a quick at-a-glance view of all the different customizable options and the corresponding prices. So we're not going to worry about that at the moment, because we will talk about all these things as we go through the registration process, but just wanted to highlight that for you. One thing you may find particularly useful is to have open the procedures manual. We've designed the registration form in such a way that it references items specific in the procedures manual by section. So if there's anything that as you're going through you're a little bit confused about, you can reference the section that should be relevant to, and that should give you a little bit more information. We've tried to make it clear and concise, but still it's a fairly lengthy document as well. As well, in the very bottom of the procedures manual, not all the way to the bottom, but towards the end. Here we go. Pardon my scrolling. So there is a copy of the registration form, so that if you want to get an idea of the information and decisions you'll need to make along the way, you can review that in the procedures manual before you start that. You may just find that a little bit easier rather than stopping and starting the registration process a few times. If you do get partway through and realize that you can't make a decision that specific day and want to come back to it, that's fine. That's not an issue at all. If you just abandon your registration partway through, we will deal with that and take care of that. But if you want to avoid that, this is a good way to do it, is by looking at the registration form in the procedures manual. The third document that I wanted to highlight before we get into the registration form is the data licensing and membership agreement. So we'll talk a little bit about membership later, but if you are going to be participating as a member, this is one of the requirements, is having a signed data licensing and membership agreement in place. The purpose of this document is that it ensures that as we, as a consortium, share all of our survey data with all the members that participate in that given year, that we are all on the same understanding of the limitations on how this data can be used, the ownership of the data, the responsibility of using another institution's data, and what you're allowed to do with it, so that you can rest assured that your data is not going to be misused, and you also have clear guidelines on how you can be using that. The most important thing to highlight is that even though you have access to the universal data file as a member, you are not permitted to be releasing anyone else's data in a way that would identify another institution. So the idea is that we share this information in trust, in goodwill, on the understanding that we will all respect each other's confidentiality with regards to that. Okay. So if you're going to be participating as a member, you don't have to sign that document if you've signed it in the past, but if you are coming on as a new member, that would be something that you would need to sign. I would recommend getting that process started early. Depending on your institution and the structure of it, it may need to go to the council at your university for a review there before that can be signed. So that's something that may take a little bit on the longer time period. So if you're planning on participating as a member for the first time, that's something that I would begin early in the process to make sure that that can get sorted out. It doesn't need to be done before you can launch the survey, but it does need to be in place before you can have access to any data for any other institution. So it's okay that you don't have it if your survey is launching, but before you can get any data, you do need to have that in place. That only, again, applies to members, and we'll again talk about membership eligibility as we go through. Let me just see. All right, so we're gonna begin. So I'm gonna click on our registration form to begin the process, and the beginning information is just information about your institution. So I'm just going to put fake information so it's clearly identified, so that Dan can remove it later and we don't confuse everyone with my fake registrations. But so I work in the Department of Office of Institutional Research, so that's what I would put here. And then I'm at Carleton University, and oh, Google has lots of options for me here. And I'll put my address in there as well. And this is just for contact's sake, so we know what the institution is. So I've just put that information in there. All right, I'll click on next. The second page is the contacts. Now, one thing that I would stress here is we have two contacts. We have a primary and a secondary contact. The primary contact should be the individual who is responsible for survey administration. So I've noticed in the past, some people have put down their university president as the primary contact. You may want to have them as a contact, understandably, but I would encourage you to put down as the primary contact the individual who's going to be doing most of the survey administration. So the person responsible for maybe pulling the population file, who's going to be able to answer questions as the survey progresses for students, and will be dealing with really the ins and outs of your survey. If you do want your university president or someone more senior in your institution, I put them on the secondary contact. That said, they will be copied on a lot of the emails that go out. So it's entirely up to you and what maybe your executive wants. So for me, I'm just going to put myself here and my email. And re-enter it to confirm it. And and my phone number there. Okay. And just for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to put myself as the secondary contact today, although I would not do that in the future because otherwise you only have one person. But just because this is a test, I'll just enter myself. All right. All right, so I'll click next to submit that, which brings us to the next page. And this is where you can choose. I presume most of you are here because you're going to be participating in the survey and not just signing up for a membership. But maybe perhaps some people will just be interested in continuing their membership in the consortium for another year. And if you want to do that, that is an option. But probably most of us are interested in participating in the survey, given that's what this webinar was advertised for. So we'll click on participation in the 2020 survey of middle year students. And we'll click next. Okay, so here's where I'm going to talk a little bit about membership. So you have two options, and depending on your institution, you may really be pegged in as a non-member here. So membership is reserved for universities that have degree granting authority. So if you are a college or a polytechnic that's participating, you would have to participate as a non-member. Membership is reserved for universities with degree granting authority, and it is a both condition. So you do have to be a university and have degree granting authority. I do know that some colleges do have degree granting authority, but this is limited to universities specifically. That is what this consortium was set up as originally, and that is how we have operated for our entire existence. So if you are not a university or don't have degree granting authority, you would have to participate as a non-member. That said, if you are a university, you can still choose to participate as a non-member, but membership does come with a lot of benefits. The biggest benefit being that you have access to the entire data file for the national data set for all participating member institutions. This allows you to do your own custom analysis and decide if you are going through and you want to do some more detailed comparisons with your CUSC data, you have the ability to do that because you have the data file. Again, as I talked about that data licensing and membership agreement, you do have to have that signed, and you have to pay your membership fee, which is $500, in order to be a participating member for that year. The data licensing and membership agreement is something that lives on in perpetuity, regardless of whether you choose not to continue as a member in the future, because it is in regards to the data that you hold. Being the collective data for all the participating institutions. So it's something that brings a lot of value, and if you are eligible for membership, I would really encourage you to do that. There's the cost of $500, but I think the bigger thing to think about is that you would be sharing your institution's survey responses. Now, it's only survey responses to close-ended questions, so any comments that your students might be giving through the CUSC survey, that wouldn't be shared with anyone else. That would only go to you. So you don't have to worry that one might be making a disparaging comment in one of the questions, and that would be shared to all the member institutions. The comments never get passed on to other members. It's only the responses to the closed-ended, the scale questions, things like that. So you don't have to worry about that, but it is something that you might want to think through. So I'm going to click that we're going to participate as a member. And I'll say that our membership is still to be paid. Now, if you're not entirely sure if membership has been paid for the year, if you're a long-standing participant with CUSC and you're not sure, go ahead and select that it still has to be paid. We, as an organization, will review our records and make sure that we don't double bill you for that as well. So if you're not sure, you don't need to stop here and go searching your financial records to see. You can just click that it still is to be paid, and we'll make sure that we resolve that issue for you and don't double bill you on that. Okay. So with that, I'm going to go to the next page here. Okay. So this is one thing that tends to trip a lot of people up, particularly people who are registering in the fall term. So I'm going to go over to the procedures manual to talk a little bit about the standard sample. Because this question here is saying, what are the total number of students at your institution who meet the definition of the standard sample? And then it says, if you're not sure, please provide an estimate. And an estimate is okay at this time. But I'm going to flip over to our procedures manual. And again, pardon the scrolling, I know it's a little disorienting. hopefully that's a little bigger. So here's the criteria for the standard sample. And the 2020 survey is the survey of middle year undergraduate students. So the standard sample would be all students who are enrolled in first entry undergraduate programs and are in the middle year of that program, right? So if it's a 3-year program, that would only be students in their second year. And we go by year standing rather than number of calendar years in a program, right? So we would, if you're thinking of a 3-year program, it would be all students in the second year of that program. If you're thinking of a 4-year program, or then it would be students in the second and third year. And I know some institutions have 5-year bachelor programs. Then you would include students in the second, third, and fourth year. So that is who was included in the standard sample. We do give a little bit of context that may be helpful by number of credit hours. Again, you are welcome to use your institution discretion and your institutional context. This is meant to be a guideline. You'll notice a very important statement here that says it may not be able to gauge middle year students with 100% accuracy, but make your best estimate based on available information. So we know that sometimes things aren't entirely clear, but there is a little bit of leeway to define it as fits your institutional context. But we do ask that you make a best effort to make sure that those students are middle year students. So first year students, students who would be graduating, special students, undeclared students, your certificate and diploma, those would not be included in the standard sample. And there is a place that we can include those students if you want to include students who don't fit the standard sample, but they wouldn't be included in the standard sample. The reason we have a standard sample is because of the data sharing. When we share information across institutions, we want to make sure that we're sharing it in a consistent way so that everyone knows that the information that you're comparing is the same kind of students that you asked at your institution. So when I compare myself to the national data set, I know that I'm comparing myself to very similar students in similar programs, at least in terms of structure, across the country, and not students from an entirely different sort of spectrum. So at this point, being that it's the fall and the standard sample is defined on the winter, I don't have a good idea of what my number is going to be, but I can come up with an estimate. And it's going to be a rough estimate at this point, but I'm just going to put 11,000 and indicate that this is an estimate. If your number is 50, if your number is 12,000, if your number is 50,000, that's okay. Just put whatever the number is, and it can be. I see that there's a question in the chat. If you're under 1,000 students, that's okay. If your standard sample is only 100 or 200, that's totally allowable. And you would just work with whatever fits the standard sample. It's more important to be ensure that it's reflective of what the sample is supposed to be, rather than some sort of magic number. Even if you only want to sample 100 students or 1,000 students here, we would put the whole number that would fit the definition, because this is used for institutional weighting, meaning that when we get the data files back, you are allowed to weight the survey responses by the number or the size of the institution to give you a better perspective of the entire national opinion set of post-secondary students who are in their middle years. So it's to give you more of a weighted national perspective. So you don't have to survey all 11,000 students. I certainly wouldn't be, but this is meant for weighting so that when you get that. If your institution doesn't have anyone that meets the standard sample, if you're, for instance, a college that doesn't have bachelor programs, you would put 0 here for your standard sample, and you would be including those students as a special sample, which is this item here, where you'd be surveying a special sample. A special sample can be any host of things. It can be students who fall outside of the structure that we identify in the standard sample. So maybe you want to survey your continuing education students, or some of your diploma students, or maybe you're a college and you don't have bachelor programs and you want to be surveying those students. Those would fall into a special sample. As well, maybe I want to oversample some students. Maybe I really care about the opinions of international students, and I want to do a full census of my international students, but I don't want to survey everyone else. Well, I would do a random sample for my standard sample, but then I would include a special sample, maybe of an oversample of my international students. So this is to give you flexibility. The standard sample is to ensure that we have uniformity across all the participating member institutions. The special sample is to allow you flexibility to include things that may be of particular interest to you or that fit outside of the standard sample. So I'm going to say yes at the moment. I'm going to say maybe I'm going to include an extra 1,000 international students to try and get a good broad perspective of them in my survey this year. And again, if you're not entirely sure at the moment, you can put in an estimate and we can firm that up at a later date once you have a better idea. Particularly if I wanted to do, for instance, a census of my international students, I wouldn't have a number at the moment. That would depend, one, on when I drew my random sample, how many of them were in there, and two, how many would register in the winter term. So it's okay if that's an estimate as well, and you'll just have to let us know when you submit the population file that that number has been revised as well. Okay, so I'm going to go on to the next page here. So the next question is, when do you want the survey to start? Now, picking a date here doesn't guarantee that you'll be able to launch on that date. If there is a particularly popular date that it seems that we have a lot of institutions that want to participate and launch their survey on, it is on a little bit of a first come, first served basis. So those institutions who do register earlier are more likely to be guaranteed their survey start date. The survey start date also is predicated on the fact that you would have all the information in, so that you would have your additional questions if you were asking them sent in sufficient time, that you have your population file, your invitation letter, that all that is in sufficient time to make sure that that is being able to be accomplished. We have January 7th as the earliest you can start. That is probably going to be very ambitious for probably almost every single institution. But if you do want to start earlier, you're welcome to that. So I'm going to pick my date, and I'm going to pick February 27th. And I'm going to have my survey close April 10th. So I mentioned the earliest the survey can go out is January 7th. And again, that does require you to have all your documents in a row and submitted to us to make sure that everything can be validated and inputted in time. And then the survey can close as late as April 12th. You can choose to close it earlier. Usually here at Carleton, we try and ensure that all of our surveys are closed before the exam period starts. So they all have to close by the last day of class, because we want students studying for their exams, not filling out our surveys as much as we care about their survey responses. So you can choose your own date here on when you want the survey to end, and we'll make sure that that closes in time. It also helps us space out how the reminders get sent out. Speaking of reminders, so we ask when your start and end dates for your institution's winter or spring break are. That's to ensure that we don't send out any email invitations or reminders during your winter break, unless you're like me and you actually want to try that and see if it works. Spoiler alert, it didn't actually work for us. We didn't get a great response rate, but it was worth trying last year. So if you put that in, by default, it will ensure that invitations and reminders don't get sent out during your winter break. So our winter break is from the 17th to the 21st of February. So I'll put that in. Not particularly relevant given I chose a very late start date for myself this year, but still an important thing to put in to make sure that we were able to make sure that we can avoid those dates for you. Okay, click next here. So C6, will your institution be using incentives? This is something we do really strongly encourage. CUSC itself doesn't provide any incentives. That's up to the institutions who administer the survey. However, we do know that a presence of an incentive is something that really helps drive response rate. So if you are wanting to make sure that as you spend money on this survey that you get a good response rate, the best way is to spend a little bit more money and make sure that you put an incentive in to encourage students to fill out the survey. What your incentive is depends. Some institutions have tried, I've heard a whole range of things. Some have done a guarantee where every student who fills out the survey gets a $5 gift card. That can be rather expensive. Some just do random draws for one prize of $100 or a smartphone, things of that nature. What the particulars of your incentive are less important than actually just having the incentive. So if this is something that's new to you, if survey administration is not something that you have a lot of experience in, you don't need to go massive. You don't need to do something cumbersome to administer. You can go with something fairly simple and just have a couple of prizes, a couple of modest prizes that would entice students to fill out the survey for you. Just make sure that they're big enough that you think that a student would actually care to want to fill out the survey for you. So that's something that I'm going to click yes. And then the question is, when would you like PRA to send you a list of respondents drawn for incentives? For me, I just care about it at the end of the survey, so I'm going to pick what my survey close date is. I've chosen to close on the 10th, so I'm just going to pick the 15th, give PRA a little bit of time to get that together. And there's no urgency to it for me. I just need to get it before students leave for the term. So I'm going to pick that as my date. If some institutions I know have done different things with early bird draws or rolling prizes where they announce a prize every week, there is an option to include that later, but there is a charge if you want to have more than one prize drawing. So we'll get to that option later as we go as well. All right, so our survey options. So in which languages would you like to receive your reports and data? There's no cost for English, French, or both. Unless you're asking to have the reports printed and physically bound for you, then there would be a cost to having both the English and the French, but otherwise there's no cost to having the data files done for in that regard. I'm going to do it in English because otherwise I won't understand it because my French is terrible. And then you can select that there. So C9, when would you like your institution to be invoiced for the items you order? For some institution, this really matters. Some people want it in a particular fiscal year, and a lot of institutions have fiscal years that end March 31st. So this just allows you to get it invoiced in the year that you want it to be invoiced. I'm going to pick after March 31st. And then you can also choose an other and specify some information there if you want, but it depends on how particular you are about that. Finally, option D, if you're using students' institutional email addresses, are there any requirements that PRA should follow so that email invitations and reminders are not blocked or tagged as spam? One thing here is if you have a spam filter or things like that, maybe put some requirements in here. So for us, the things that we need to know what the IP addresses are of the machines that we'll be emailing. As well, we need to know the email addresses to try and put a temporary bypass on our spam filter to make sure that those emails get through. So I would put that in here, that I would need the machine IP addresses and the email address that the survey invitations will be coming from. And that information will be forwarded to you as required. I'd also put in here that I would want to test it with an internal email as well before going live, just to make sure that the spam bypass is working. I know different systems are different and that people have different needs and requirements. So if there's specific things that you need in order to make sure that your emails go through and aren't flagged as spam, that's the place to communicate that to us to make sure that we can launch this successfully for you here. I'll just reiterate the thing that Glenn has typed into chat here. So for Alberta institutions, the invoice date only matters if you order additional items not covered by the province. And if you are just ordering what is the standard items from the province, just choose, I think you can just choose before March 31st, and that's fine. You'll only be invoiced for the items that would be above and beyond what is covered by the province there for you there. Okay, so the next item, the survey results package, the number of students invited to participate. If you remember before, we were asked what the number of students that would be fit the definition of the standard sample. That doesn't mean that you're forced to survey all of them. This is here where you can choose the size of your standard sample, or the size of the sample that you want to draw from your standard sample. If you included a special sample, make sure you combine that here, because the cost is dependent on how many students are included in the total sample pool, which is your standard sample plus your special sample. So I indicated that I wanted to do 1,000 students in a special sample, and if I want to do 1,000 students in my regular sample as well, that would give me the 2,000. So I would select this option here, 1,501 to 2,000 students. It entirely depends here on what you want to do. Typically, we say that the usual size is 1,000 students. Again, maybe your institution is smaller, maybe you don't have 1,000 students that fit the standard sample, that's okay. Or maybe you want to do a census, maybe you really want to do breakdowns by faculty or by some sort of demographic within your institution, and you want more granular information, and so you need higher response numbers. You're welcome to do that as well. That option is available to you there. So just choose the size, and again, make sure that it's the standard sample plus the special sample there. Okay, and then there's a number of optional additions that you can choose. So if you want more than 2 incentive draws, I think I said it was more than 1 incentive draw earlier, it's more than 2, pardon me. So if you want more than 2 incentive draws, there's a charge of $50 per draw. So if you choose yes, you can just indicate the number that you would like there. So again, if you want to do a weekly rolling draw or things like that, you're welcome to do that. I haven't found that it's particularly beneficial in terms of number of response rates unless it comes with a fulsome communication plan. And it's a lot of work, and I'm not sure entirely how effective it is. But nevertheless, if that's something that your institution wants to try, you're welcome to it. Just know that if you go beyond 2 draws for incentive, we do charge for that to compensate for the time that PRA spends doing that for you. Additional email reminders. So I'm going to flip the procedures manual here. So pardon me. So it was section 9.1.1. So I'm going to scroll down to that here. So reminder emails and email invitations. So we provide a template here for you. The email invitation and the reminder emails. 2 reminder emails are sent as part of the default package. If you would like more as a way to try and encourage responses, or if you want to spread them out, if you have a specific plan that you would like, you're welcome to do that. There is a charge for that, given to recover the cost that is spent programming that. So you can choose either 1 additional reminder or 2 additional reminders. So the maximum is 4 additional reminders. And that is entirely up to you. I usually end up going with the maximum. I figure I want as many respondents as I can get, and harassing people or nagging people is an effective strategy, so I'm going to pick 2 additional reminders for myself here. So that would be $150 per reminder. So that would be an extra cost of $300 to me that I would include then for the 2 additional reminders, which again is a total of 4 reminders as part of your package. Option F3, so this is something new that we added this year, and I do want to clarify a little bit. So it says customized invitation and email reminders, charge of $200. This is not if you want to customize some language, right? So if you want to put your president's name, or you want to put an institutional logo or something fairly simple, that's covered by default. What is not covered that you would have to choose and pay extra for is if you want an entirely customized template for your email, if you want to change all the fonts, if you want to add a header, a footer, an institutional logo, you know, a variety of images. If you want to include things that would be beyond the standard fare, which is the language of it and an institutional logo, then there would need to be a charge for that. And that's really just to recover the time that's spent programming those emails and reminders. And it does take a lot of care to make sure that they work perfectly, particularly when you're working with customized templates. So if you're doing something fancy, that requires some programming, then you would need to choose yes for that. Typically, I just have some standard language that we use. I'll send to our president, and we'll slap our institutional logo on the top, and that's about as far as we go. So that would be covered under the normal customization of the email. So this option is really just for more advanced customizations, and again, headers, footers, templates, things of that nature. If you're unsure, by all means, contact us and ask. And if you say no and then you change your mind later, we can also make that change for you as well. So you're not locked into that option, but it does let us know in advance so that we can plan for the amount of work that has to be done in helping make sure that your survey launches on time. So I'm going to say no to that one. Item F4, so additional questions. So it's $150 per question. And these are custom questions for your institution only. So if you are part of a collaboration group and that collaboration group is asking questions, that's not what we're referring to here. This is questions that would only be included for your institution. So if you want to include some questions about maybe a specific service that's unique to your campus, or there's a particular hot topic of interest that you would want to include in the CUSC survey, you're welcome to do that. And the cost is $150 per question. Now, one thing I do want to clarify is that these questions do have to be approved by the CUSC board. And the reason we do that is we want all the questions that are included in a CUSC survey to reflect the mission and values that we have as CUSC as an organization. So we'll review those and make sure that they're in line with our mission of what we do as an organization. And as well, hopefully provide you with some useful tips, perhaps in refining the language of your question. Survey design is particularly challenging, and we have a number of people who have spent a lot of years doing survey administration and survey design. So hopefully they would be able to provide you with some good feedback to help refine your questions and make them a little bit more effective for you in gathering the information that you would need. One thing I'll say is that sometimes people say yes and they say they're going to ask one additional question, and that one additional question has 9 parts. If you're trying to just combine 9 questions into one question, note that there is a charge then for each of those individual sub-questions to it. So it is to reflect the amount of programming that has to be done to input each question and each response item. So just note that as you're thinking about it in terms of the design. And again, as you're designing questions, if you want some clarification on it, feel free to just get in touch with us, and we're happy to help about that. If you do say yes, you'll see this little prompt that shows up here, and it says, please send your additional questions to CUSC. It gives our email address at least 4 weeks prior, and it inputs the date that you've chosen as your survey start date there for you. So I would need to submit them by the end of January to make sure that they were available in sufficient time. That gives us time to not only review, give suggestions, and get an agreement on how the questions are going to be worded. It also gives then PRA time to make sure that they're able to input those questions into your survey, and gives you time to as well test to make sure that the questions are the way that you'd like them to look and they're behaving as you expect as well. So we want to make sure that we give sufficient time to not only just do the review part, but as well do the testing and close that loop on there for you. So item F6, so collaboration data and report. The cost is to be determined here, and this is depending on the level of customization that goes on in your collaboration group. If you choose yes, it does give you an option here. So if you are in the Alberta collaboration group, that option is available for you right there when you do that, so you don't need to type that in. That is one of the options you can choose. So if you're an Alberta institution who's participating in that collaboration group, you just select yes here and then choose that as well. If you're interested in getting a number of institutions together to be a collaboration group and maybe having some standard questions across a number of institutions and some customized reports that way, you're welcome to do that. That's something that you have to organize yourself. We don't organize that for you, but if you want to do that. So if I wanted to try and convince a number of my Ontario colleagues to get together and make an Ontario collaboration group, I'm welcome to do that. I would just type that in here. And that's an option that's available to you. So I'm just going to pick one for now, even though I'm not in Alberta and I will not be in the Alberta collaboration group. For the sake of today's demonstration, I will be. So screen 9 brings us to our optional additional reports and services. So these are a number of reports that you can order. So part of the standard package that you get comes with a master report, which is the national data for all member institutions. It comes with an institutional long report, which if you're a member, gives you a breakdown of all the survey responses for your institution compared to the different groups of institutions and the national results there as well. And a short report that breaks down some of your high-level results in a very quick way with a number of graphs. So those are included in the default package. There's 3 other options here for you. So one is a comparison report. It's a cost of $400. The comparison report allows you to pick a number of institutions and create your own comparison set, or maybe have PRA run a specific report that will compare you to your group. So maybe group 2 institutions or group 1 institutions, and do some testing to see where there are differences for you. So it's a way that you can get that data and have some of that analysis done for you and in a report packaged for you. So that is an option that's available there, and you can choose either a specific custom group for your comparison report, or you can choose one of the existing comparison groups. If you're creating your own group, there is a minimum of 4 institutions that will need to be included. That's part of our data licensing and membership agreement to make sure that when we are comparing across institutions that we're never in any way identifying another institution. So we ask for a minimum of 4 institutions in any comparison set. The executive report is a shorter report. It's unique to your institution. It highlights some of the key differences between your institution and comparable institutions. Again, the comparable institutions can be the group that you're in. It can be a set of institutions that you would like. So that's entirely up to you how you define that, just with the comparison report. The difference here is that this focuses, it's more a narrative report, and it focuses on some of the high level differences between you and your peer group that you're comparing to. It's written specifically for your institution. It's not just a matter of running a massive mail merge. So it is a little bit more expensive in that there's some careful analysis that's done and narrative to get you some really quick at a glance highlights of how your institution did in CUSC compared to your comparison group. So that's the executive report. And then finally, there's an option that if you really don't want to read all your comments and want PRA to categorize them for you to get an at-a-glance view in some sort of quantitative way of all that qualitative data that you've gathered, you can have your open-ended comments categorized, and the cost is determined based on the number of open-ended comments that you get. So it's a cost of 65 cents for each respondent's completed open-ended question that you would like categorized. And so if there's a specific question that you really care about, you can just have that done, or you can have it done for all the open-ended questions that are in the survey. And that cost then is determined at the end based on the number of open-ended questions that you have. Option F10. So all reports that you order are delivered in electronic format and are transferred to you through a secure FTP site along with your data files. However, we know that some people really are still attached to their paper copies. So if you want a paper copy, we do charge for that, and that's not a default option that we include. So there is a cost for that. So the cost is listed there, and that includes both the printing, the binding, and the shipping to you. Can non-members get executive or categorized response? So let me just take a look at the here. So 11.7, 11.8. So many details. I want to make sure I get them right here for you. So the comparison and executive reports are for members only. The idea being that the whole point of the comparison and the executive reports is that it compares you to other institutions. And the only way you can be compared to other institutions is if you have access to the data of other institutions. And so we will not be comparing institutions against institutions that they don't have data for. So You can only compare against member institutions, and you can only have your data compared if you are a member. So those are only available to member institutions. The collaboration group report is the one that is available to non-members if you are participating in a collaboration group. The categorizing of open-ended responses, that is available for members and non-members. Again, because that is open-ended comments are only delivered to the institution for which they came from. So no other institution gets to see anyone else's open-ended comments. So that service is available for members and non-members alike. Thank you for that question and clarification. That's good. All right, option F11. So if you would like unique links to include in either your student portal or your learning management system to send invitations and reminders, that's an option that's available to you here. So you can choose that, and then you can input those links either into your learning management system or your student portal. There are so many different student portals and learning management systems, so we don't have resources available to you, but if you happen to know an institution that uses a similar either learning management system or portal system and want to see if you can get some information that might help your IT folks be able to create that for you, that is there. We have one that's created in-house, and I'm not sure how effective it's going to be since our portal is slowly dying and will be replaced soon, but it's something that I've used in the past and have had a lot of success with, but it's going to depend on your institutional context. Sorry, I see a question in the chat here. Collaboration report, is this our Alberta group? Yes, if you're an Alberta institution, that would be your Alberta collaboration group report, correct. And then finally, that brings us to the end. So are there any additional comments about your registration? So if you have any concerns, if there's anything that you think is unique to your institution that you wanna put here to make sure that we are able to deliver the survey in a way that you wanted, this would be the place to put that in there for you. And it's just any last comments that you have about your registration. There's a statement about withdrawal here. So we ask for at least 2 weeks notice. Your institution will be charged a fee if you withdraw with less than 2 weeks notice. And that's just to recuperate. We just charge it on a cost recovery basis for the amount of work that's been already done, programming your emails or programming your survey and getting it ready for you. So the charge isn't specified here, but it's done on a cost recovery basis to indicate just the programming costs that are done if you withdraw with less than 2 weeks before your anticipated launch date. Okay, and with that, you would submit your registration, and then the system will automatically generate a confirmation email for you and send all the data and options that you selected for your institution. So I'm gonna go ahead and submit that. And you'll get a little confirmation as well that your registration was successfully submitted. So that's the registration process. Hopefully that is clear. I'm just looking at the chat, sorry. So I see a question that says, I want to have reports available for main campus and sub-campuses separately. How do you do that? So I believe in the past, there's 2 ways to do that. One is you can enroll as 2 different institutions. That's a fairly expensive way of doing it. Another way is you could order a custom report that would allow you to do that. So you could do a comparison report between the 2 institutions, I believe. I believe that is an option that's available. Maybe just get in touch with us and we'll confirm that that's the case. But since I'm sometimes wrong when I speak on details off the top of my head, but I believe that is the case, that if you order a comparison report. Oh, and Nicholas just sent me a message confirming that. Yeah, so a comparison report is how you would do that. And you just have to make sure that when you include your sample file, that there's a flag that would indicate what campus a respondent would be part of, so that analysis could be done for you. Otherwise, you'll have to have a crosswalk table and send that over to PRA to have them to do that for you. So I would just make sure that you do that. Which brings me to my last thing that I want to talk about while I'm here, which is the sample population file. So again, pardon the scrolling in this document. Okay, So I'm just going to quickly talk about the population file that you'd be submitting, just to make sure that everyone is clear on what needs to be submitted. So these are the mandatory fields that we ask for. So first is ID, and this is not your student ID within your student records information system. I know that there's some jurisdictions in which you're not allowed to transmit that. That's considered personal information. So you can just generate a unique ID. We often just generate, you know, case 1 is number 1 all the way down. And we just keep that file for our records so that we can do a match when we get the data back. So this is not your student's ID in your student information system. This is just a unique individual ID that you assign to that student for the sake of this survey. First and last name, we ask that you use your student's first preferred name, if that's an option for your institution. I move the screen down. Oh, not sure what I'm supposed to do, sorry. Am I having trouble showing what I'm trying to show here, Dan? Can I unmute you? I don't know how to do that. Click.
Yes, yes, Tyler. I just when you were in that screen, it was just thing off the top of the.
Oh, this here, table 5.5. Is that what you're referring
Yes,
to?
yes, but I see you're scrolling through the information.
Yes, yeah. So at the top here is an example of what your file would look like. I'm just going to go through and talk about the options. Yeah. Thank you, Dan. So next mandatory field is the student's email. You can use whatever email that you want for the students. At our institution, we have a policy that we only communicate to our students through their official Carleton email, so that I would only put the Carleton email in. If you have multiple emails, you can include those there. Just make sure you indicate that it's email 1, email 2, etc. Next is the SIP classification, and we use the 2.4-digit format. So this allows you, when you get the master data file, if you're a member, to allow you to do some comparison, not just across institutions, but maybe across programs and across programs nationally as well. So I know that some people have used CUSC data for maybe quality assurance or program reviews, and you can, if you're a member, you can get that data and you can look at that both internally and nationally as well by submitting the SIP data for your programs. Sample, so this is where you would indicate just by way of words whether this individual is part of the standard sample or the special sample. Again, the standard sample is the only data that is shared as part of the master data set for members. The special sample is only for you. For non-members, again, none of that data is shared with anyone. It's only for your institution unless you're in a collaboration group. Year of study. So this is where you would just indicate if a student is in their second year, the value would be 2, third year 3, fourth year 4, etc. Length, this is where you indicate the length of a student's program. Again, depending on what your institutional context is, so typical values 3, 4, and 5. Age, we ask that you submit a student's age as of September 1st of 2019. It's the idea of how old that student was when they began that academic year. Citizenship, so it's really just a measure of whether they're a Canadian citizen, a permanent resident, or an international visa student, or if you don't know, that would be a value of 9. Gender, again, what you have from your information system at your institution, 1 female, 2 male, 3 other, and 9 is unknown. And then load is just a full-time, part-time measure. The one thing I would encourage you to do is once you have your population file created, just run through and do a few checks to make sure that it appears what you would expect, right? So maybe you'll do a frequency on gender just to make sure. Most institutions, myself excluded, but most institutions have more female students than male students. So maybe you want to check and make sure that that's coded correctly by making sure that in your population file that you have more females than males. Or right, for age, you would anticipate that most of your students would probably be in the 19 to 21 age range. So you might want to run a frequency to make sure that it's reflective of that. So I would really encourage you, as you're putting together your population file, to run some checks on the data that you pull to make sure that that is information consistent with what you expect it to pull. Because once the survey goes live, you've really sent it to a group of students. You really want to make sure that you're sending it to the right student. So I'd really strongly encourage you to do that. I know that Nicholas at PRA does a little bit of testing himself, but again, he's only got so much knowledge depending on your institutional context. You're going to have a lot more knowledge about what your institution is like. So I'd encourage you to do that before you submit that. So I think that brings me to the end of everything I wanted to talk about, which is a lot. I've been talking for 55 minutes here. So if there are questions that I haven't had a chance to ask or answer, feel free to either type them in the chat. You can put your hand up as a little way to flag. I'm going to turn off the sharing here for the moment. So feel free, if you have questions, now would be a great time. If you think of a great question after you've disconnected from our webinar today, by all means, send us an email. Our emails are on our website there. So don't be shy, get in touch. We're always happy to help and discuss that and make things easier for you. So if there's any questions, I'll take them now, but otherwise, that brings us to the end of our content for today. Okay, well, not seeing or hearing any, I'm going to take that as a sign that maybe we've answered things and given you thorough information here today. So just thank you very much for joining us. We really hope that you'll join us for our 2020 survey of middle year students. Look forward to having you with us. And again, if you have questions, please reach out. We're a very helpful bunch, particularly Dan. Dan is very helpful, very responsive. So get in contact with us. We'll love to help you in any way we can. And we hope to have you join us for the 2020 survey. So thanks everyone and have a great day.